I'd like you to stand now in honor of the living word, whose voice can be heard in the written word, today coming to us from the 28th chapter of Matthew. After the Sabbath, at dawn on the first day of the week, Mary Magdalene and the other Mary came to look at the tomb. Look, there was a great earthquake, for an angel from the Lord came down from heaven. Coming to the stone, he rolled it away and sat on it. Now his face was like lightning, and his clothes as white as snow. The guards were so terrified of him that they shook with fear and became like dead men. But the angel said to the women, "Don't be afraid. I know that you're looking for Jesus who was crucified. He isn't here because he's been raised from the dead, just as he said. Come, see the place where they laid him. Now hurry, go and tell his disciples, he's been raised from the dead. He's going on ahead of you to Galilee. You will see him there. I've given the message to you." With great fear and excitement, they hurried away from the tomb and ran to tell his disciples. But Jesus met them and greeted them. They came and grabbed his feet and worshiped him. Then Jesus said to them, "Don't be afraid. Go and tell my disciples that I am going into Galilee. They will see me there." The word of God for the people of God. Thanks be to God. You may be seated. In a world where fake news is pervasive, it's easy to come to church on Easter Sunday and assume that the story we're telling is just an early version of fake news. We might all sing, "We know that Christ is raised," but at our core, many of us are suspicious. We become even more suspicious when we realize that this isn't the way we've heard the story told before. You see, Matthew includes details none of the other gospel writers mention. He includes the Roman guards, for example. And Matthew describes the angel, who not only rolls a stone away, but rather smugly sits on it. He also tells us about the earthquake. Those details, which I think should make it more vivid, for some of us, make it more suspect. We want to run this story through that new Google app that verifies the authenticity of a news story. Now, if that includes you, you're not alone. There were people who questioned this story from the very beginning. It's why I believe Matthew includes this story of the guards at the tomb. He wants to remind us that there were eyewitnesses there that morning who were not followers of Jesus. But fake news then is just like fake news now. If a news story is telling us what we want to be true, we're going to believe it. If it fits our worldview, we claim it to be authentic. No matter what the source of the story may be, no matter who is telling us the story, no matter how right or wrong the story is, and no amount of counter-evidence is going to change our minds. If it's what we want to be true, we're going to believe it. And politicians and salesmen and con artists take advantage of that fact. That's why there are people who deny the Holocaust happened, and why there are some people who claim the earth is flat, or think that the moon landing is a Hollywood hoax. It's also why some people refuse to believe that climate change has anything to do with the way we're living our lives. Those same people look at the churches that are full today and say, we're here to listen to a story we want to hear. That resurrection has nothing to do with verifiable truth. They believe Easter is a story that fits our worldview, and so we accept it no matter how irrational it may seem. To them, we are celebrating fake news this morning, because from their perspective, this news comes from a very different worldview. Matthew tells us that the Roman guards and the women saw the same thing. They all felt the earthquake. They witnessed the stone rolling away. And as perplexing as it seems at first, when the stone moves, there is no one inside. The earthquake opens the tomb, an event that presents a whole host of possible explanations, all of which require a shift in worldview. Now, I know some people assume it's a sleight of hand. There are others who wondered if it was the wrong tomb. Whatever happened, however, the angel apparently moves the stone for the people to see in, not for Jesus to get out. Faced with the contradictions of an earthquake that opens a door to an empty tomb, the men at the scene fall away in fear, while the women hurry to tell the story in celebration. The soldiers and the women all saw the same event, but with starkly different responses, all because they have a different worldview. Now, whether you hear the story as fake news or as an eternal truth probably has to do with your worldview, with your understanding of what is possible. It begs the question about those competing worldviews. Is it possible that the truth we seek can only be found by exploring our worldviews? Are we willing to let the earthquake of Easter open our eyes to the dawning of a new day? Or do we see it as an event that closes off possibilities? As I reflected on that question this week, I realized that most of the earth-shattering events that I've experienced in my life were events that felt like they closed off possibilities more than they were to open them up, at least at first. We all remember, for instance, the way it felt when the Twin Towers fell in New York. It was like the earth shook, and the future became very bleak. I've sat and listened to earth-shattering news as people found out about a diagnosis of cancer. And all too often it was closing off the possibilities. I remember getting that phone call when my 18-year-old nephew died in a motorcycle accident. It seemed as if the future had diminished. For some, there have been equally disconcerting news events as elections take place and votes are tallied and decisions are made. When we have only heard those earth-shattering events as negative events, when we only notice the shifting sands of time as if they are always closing off possibilities, we're acting like the guards at the tomb. We're letting our worldview limit our vision to what we can see, rather than to the possibilities that God has in store. This week, the Jewish people celebrated Passover, a story when they rehearsed the story of salvation. Part of that story includes the time when the people of Israel come to the shore of the Red Sea. And there were many there that day who could only see death and destruction. They saw no way out. They let their limited vision preclude them from seeing what God can do. But when God intervenes, the water parts, Stones roll away, and the earth moves under our feet. I feel the earth move under my feet. I feel the sky trembling down. Carole King's classic rock and roll hit talks about the earth moving under her feet, not because of something bad that is happening, but because of something good that is taking place. It's a shifting worldview that puts someone else at the center of her universe, an event that she can only describe as using the metaphor of an earthquake. I think I've told you this story before about one of the foster children we had years ago. In many ways, she was just like any other 4-year-old. But I was telling a colleague about her shortly after she came, and I said, wait, did you feel that? She must have moved across the living room because the center of the universe just shifted. On Easter, the earthquake is a sign that something good is taking place. The center of the universe is shifting. We're standing at the dawn of a new day. And nothing, absolutely nothing, is the same. The earth continues to shake whenever we allow God to become the center of our lives. When the center of our universe shifts from the things that we think are important to those times when we can see and allow God's priorities to shape our vision. In the most recent edition of the Naval War College Review, there is an article that talks about how seeing a map can affect the way we understand a story. It's similar to what I remember reading years ago about the various maps we've grown up seeing. The author talked about 3 ways most of the world maps have been drawn in the past. One of them has the Americas on the left and splits the Pacific Ocean. The other one is with the Americas in the center, splitting the Indian Ocean. Less common to us, perhaps, is the third one with the Americas on the right, splitting the Atlantic Ocean. The exercise at the War College did it differently a few years ago. They ended up splitting the Americas so that all of the oceans were intact. The U.S. East Coast was on the left side of the map, and the U.S. West Coast was on the right side of the map. I couldn't find one to show you. In fact, no one had ever seen the world map drawn that way. But it changed the way they saw the world. When you change your view of the world, you see things you didn't see before. In fact, you see things you couldn't see before. The women at the tomb come to the tomb to look at something. But what they see isn't what they were expecting. But they were open to new possibilities. The guards, who can't see the possibility of resurrection and new life, are left quaking in their boots while the women run to tell the story. I don't think it's a coincidence that on their way, the women see Jesus, even though the angel had told them they would see him when they get to Galilee. They have a new worldview, a worldview that opens their eyes and allows them to see Jesus. The same thing happens to us whenever we let the story of Jesus affect the way we see the world around us. A new day dawns whenever we recognize that our worldview has been limited by our understanding of the past. A new day dawns when we change our worldview so that we can see the possibilities of what God wants to do in the future. Ron and I have a close friend whose life made a dramatic change several years ago. Prior to that event, he could only see what was important to him, and he could only see what was important at that particular moment in time. But a good friend of his helped him see the world differently. God became the center of his life, and everything changed. Now, his circumstances are still the same. He still lives on a meager income. But his perspective changed because of this earth-shattering event when he invited Christ into his heart. He saw the dawning of a new day, a day made possible by Easter. And I know others who can point to a medical miracle they experienced as a time when the world shifted. I also remember another time, about 5 years ago, when Rhonda agonized over her job. She wasn't being fulfilled. The hours were longer than she had agreed to when she began working there. There was almost no appreciation for her work or her abilities. After much prayer and consideration, we decided her happiness was more important than her paycheck. It was an earthquake of sorts for her and our family as we struggled with how to trust God and move forward. But the very next day, someone offered her a different kind of job in an entirely different field. She found her work there so fulfilling that we began to wonder why she hadn't started working in that field years earlier. Her entire life outlook changed. It couldn't have happened if we hadn't been open to a different kind of worldview. We can stay here today and look inside the empty tomb wondering if it's fake news. All we will see is the same thing the guards at the tomb saw. Or we can remember the words of the angel to the women. He isn't here because he's been raised from the dead, just as he said. We will find him if we follow the women and look for Jesus in the Galilees of our lives. It takes a shift in our worldview that says Jesus is to be found in the world around us, not inside the walls of the church. It requires us to open our eyes and see the new day that is dawning. It is a lot like a song I remember singing when I was in high school. Some of you may remember it. In the chorus it asks and then answers the question, have you seen Jesus, my Lord? He's here in plain view. Take a look. Open your eyes. He'll show it to you. A new day is dawning. Thanks be to God.